This video will have massive spoilers for both Invincible and The Boys that have not aired on either show yet. If you only watch the shows and don't want to be spoiled for events that only happen in the comics so far, probably don't watch this video right now. And if you haven't seen them, both of these shows are really good and I'd highly recommend them. Though I've not seen The Boys Season 2 yet, so I guess I should probably take my own advice. Also, I'm no expert on these series by any means, even though I do really like them. And I'm not a versus debater by any stretch. So feel free to correct me in the comments if I get anything wrong in regards to these characters' stats or their stories. I don't usually make videos like this on individual matchup ideas, but given that I have stuff to say about this matchup, and given that it's pretty likely for another Death Battle Amazon tie-in, I figured, why not? So right away I need to clarify the title. This is why I don't want Homelander vs Omni-Man on Death Battle, not why I dislike it as a matchup. Because thematically I think it kinda works. They're basically the most iconic modern versions of the what if Superman was evil concept, with both starting out as comic series that to my knowledge were fairly niche. But I'm not into comics by any means, so it would make sense that I wouldn't have heard of either series regardless of their popularity. And they were both brought into the super mainstream very recently with their new shows as more adult takes on the superhero genre. They're both the most powerful individuals in their worlds, with nothing the government can throw at them to put them down should they go rogue. And they both pose as the benevolent protectors of Earth, only to later have everyone turn on them after their crimes get exposed. My reason for not wanting this isn't because it isn't thematic. Well, kinda. The connections do exclusively focus on Omni-Man early in the series, despite how much he changes later on in the comics. His son is able to change him as a person, and he does eventually start fighting for Earth to defend them against the Viltrumites, while Homelander dies the same sociopath that he always was. But that can at least be shown as a good example of them contrasting. Plus, a lot of people I've seen requesting this seem to be basing this off just the shows, so the issue doesn't exist there since Omni-Man is still very early on in development. Though this does create the separate issue of Omni-Man only having 8 episodes to work with. And also neither of their show versions are even close to completing their stories, but let's not worry about that. My other big issue with the fight is fairness. Usually I don't care how fair a fight is. I mean, Yoda vs Mickey still cracked my top 10 favourite episodes despite being a colossal stomp. But generally, I do prefer when matches aren't completely obvious about who would win from a glance. And usually there are different ways you can interpret things for characters to make a fight someone would usually consider a stomp into something fairly close. Lex vs Doom is a very recent example of this. Some believe Doom stomps, some believe it's very close, your mileage will vary. But Homelander vs Omni-Man, I just don't get how any interpretation of this match will result in Homelander standing a ghost of a chance. Especially after both continuities of The Boys received nerfs recently. No matter which version of Homelander you use, it's a complete wash. Invincible isn't a direct adaptation of the comics, but it's faithful enough to where I feel it's fair to use both versions for Omni-Man. Especially since if you don't, that means he's got like 8 episodes to work with. So let's ignore the nerfs and use them for Homelander anyway, because without them, both continuities of him are accepted at building level, and that's just rough. In the comics, there was apparently a town level calc for Stormfront being able to create natural disasters. And in the show, it stated that there's no weapon on Earth they haven't tried to throw at Homelander, and none of them have worked. And Death Battle themselves have interpreted that literally before to include nukes. Let's ignore the assumption that he just got the hell out of Dodge when the nuke was on its way, and just give him the benefit of the doubt and say he tanked one. The strongest nuke ever built had a yield of 50 megatons of TNT. There's also a calc for him saving Billy from the explosion at the end of Season 1 that came out to a little over 4 times the speed of sound. All very impressive. Anyway, here's Omni-Man taking part in a collision that annihilated an entire planet. And here's him flying off the face of the Earth and into deep space. In the show, it stated that he left the solar system before Mark woke up from being beaten unconscious. In the comic, he had flown to another planet with life on it and it didn't even take him a week. Now, I'm no versus debater, and I wouldn't even know how to begin calcing any of this, but like, this seems pretty open and shut. So that's more or less my piece on Homelander vs Omni-Man as a matchup. It's not necessarily one that I would be upset about if it got announced, but it is still a total wash with pretty much no debate to it. And the connections heavily rely on versions of the characters that don't have a whole lot to work with. So what would I prefer for these characters? Surely I'm not just going to say I don't want this match and then offer no alternative, because I really like both of these characters. Homelander has such amazing stage presence that draws me in every time he shows up on screen. And Omni-Man is voiced by J.K. Simmons, which, I mean, even if he wasn't a well-written character, the voice acting alone would be more than enough to make up for that. I would love to see Death Battle use these characters, just not against each other. For Homelander, well, most of his matches aren't really my cup of tea, purely because I just don't know most of his opponents that well. Brightburn, Hancock, Captain Celebrity, I wouldn't know where to begin with any of them. But there is one opponent I have in mind for him, and returning viewers probably already know who it is. Homelander versus Titan from Megamind. Unlike with Omni-Man, Homelander contrasts with Titan in a way that's actually intended by the people who request it, thanks to the massive tonal differences between their series. But they have a good amount of connections as well. Neither were born with their powers, they were both infused with them by the main villains of their series. Never thought I'd say something that drew a comparison between Megamind and the Nazis, but there we go. Neither were pure of heart, but they put on a heroic facade in order to gain the affection they desperately wanted. With Homelander it was to get the general public to love him, and with Titan it was so Roxanne would get with him. And of course, both turned into maniacal supervillains that, at least for show Homelander, couldn't be physically competed with, and the heroes had to rely on manipulation to stand a chance. They both also used their enhanced vision to be perverts as well, so there you go, I guess. Fairness-wise, this entirely depends on what you believe for Homelander and which continuity you go with. Both continuities would lose with the debuffs in place. Titan chucking the big skyscraper chunk and outracing an explosion should be more than enough for him to take it. But if you don't believe the nerfs, then the show version becomes a much more interesting debate with Titan being stronger and faster, while Homelander is just too durable for him to kill. Oh, and the comic one with the town level scaling would mop the floor with Titan, but let's just ignore that. As for animation potential, this might have more than Homelander vs Omni-Man. Both of them have heat vision here, which means one character doesn't have to fight exclusively in hand-to-hand. And the fights in both of their series typically have comparable levels of destruction, so it wouldn't feel too out of place for one of them to go much further beyond anything that their series has shown. I also think they could have a good dynamic in terms of banter. Homelander can start trying to preserve his public image, but as the fight progresses he can start to lose his composure more and more, until he goes into a full-on bloodlust and starts contributing to the collateral damage that their fight causes. I'd also want him to have the same kind of overwhelming stage presence that he does in the show. Titan could start the fight with his usual cocky attitude, not knowing who Homelander is. But then he can also start to lose his composure. We can start with a cold and calculating Homelander versus a really smug Titan, only for it to devolve into Homelander shouting at him as Titan just screeches in a blind fury. There's a lot of potential for funny exchanges, solid choreography, good bits of environmental destruction that feel impactful in spite of a small scale. Yeah, this could definitely work. And yeah, this was one of my most wanted matches back when I did the video covering those. And it still is. Probably not number 7 anymore, but it's still up there. As for Omni-Man, I don't really like most of the matches that I've heard for him. I've heard him versus Saitama, which I just don't get. I've seen him thrown into a battle royale with Titan, Homelander and Brightburn, as if throwing a planetary character in with 3 building level 1s doesn't suck out any kind of suspense the match could have. But I do quite like the idea of Omni-Man versus Bardock. At first glance it's just Goku versus Superman if they were both assholes, but not only do the connections go much deeper than that, it's also a match that's not nearly on the same scale. Bardock is still a pretty low tier Dragon Ball character power wise. With a power level of 10,000 he's not even hitting Saiyan Saga Vegeta's level, and the best feats that era of Dragon Ball has are planet busts. So Bardock should be in a similar level of power to Omni-Man. If you include the non-canon special that gives him Super Saiyan, that's a 50 times boost that would certainly push him ahead of Nolan's strength, but he should still be a good bit slower. I hear Saiyan Saga characters are generally accepted at relativistic to a few times the speed of light, so let's say Super Saiyan puts him at 50 to 100 times the speed of light. Nolan flying to another life-inhabiting planet within a week should still be more than enough to make him faster. So there's a good chance this fight could go either way if I haven't missed anything. Though that's just talking about the verdict, not the connections, so allow me to fix that. Both are alien warriors who started out conquering worlds for an evil tyrant. They eventually had 2 sons, one of which would die and the other would go on to become the biggest hero in the universe. They had hardened demeanors, but in the end they wanted the best for their family and even turned on their former empire in order to protect them. And they both even died because of it. There's way more that just vibes with Bardock as an Omni-Man opponent for me much better than with Homelander. The connections, the decently interesting debate, and the much greater fight potential due to this being a Dragon Ball character compared to a guy who has never been seen shown fighting someone on his own level. In the show at least. there are probably a few instances of Homelander fighting in the comics. Also, it means you could have the destructive scale be way bigger than with Homelander and not have it be jarring. So there you go, alternate matchups for Homelander and Omni-Man. This is much more versus debatey than I'd usually get, and I don't do it very often, so there's a good chance that I've gotten something wrong. But the general idea still stands. If you still like Homelander vs Omni-Man after watching this, then that's fine. I mean, you can see from my own Most Wanted Episodes video that you can make the same criticisms against a good few of my own favourite matchups. My most wanted right now is Boros vs Deoxys, which has super minimal surface level connections and can be argued as a stomp. But I still want it anyway for the animation potential and my connection to both of the characters in the series that they come from. So if Homelander vs Omni-Man is in the same boat for you, then I totally get it. I'm not trying to shoot down anyone's dream match, just explaining why I'd rather these characters got to fight others that I can feel better utilise the potential that they have. Anyway, that's all for this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Maybe I'll make more videos covering my thoughts on single matchups in the future, who knows. I'll see you in the next one, whatever that is.